look like? This is just so hard to wear. All right, good morning, everyone. If we can just call to order, and I will invite Tame to do a karakia for today.
We haven't I was so happy last night because some tears came from heaven and did my gardens, and I didn't have to go around thinking about a waterman. Reira kānui te mihi atu kia koe, Tim kānui te mihi atu kia koe, hoki mai ki tēnei whare, ai kororo i ngā kaupapa. Rātau ku tūhono a roro hiko, Māleina koutou hoki e tūhono ki tēnei kaupapa, anei te mihi atu kia koe katoa. Nō reira e tātua kaharawa, ka hāpai ngā kōrero ki te tāhuhu, kia manāpiti o mātou katoa ngā mema o tēnei taone rangatira, ngā mema o te kaunihera, e te manu kāhui hoki, tēnei te mihi atu kia koutou katoa e kōrero i ngā kaupapa, hei pāinga mō tēnei taone rangatira o tātou, tēnei te mihi atu kia koutou. I te hunga ko whetu rangitia, ko huri hea ki te pō, moi mai koutou i rote i te ariki. E whare o te kingi, tēnei te mihi ona ki a koutou, kia tūhono, kia kemihea, kia huarai, kia pai here, ngā manu erua, kia pai te rere, i rote i tēnei ao, me ao te aroa whānu. Tēnei te mihi atu ki a koutou, i rungi tingo tō mātou kai whakaora, wā ke ake, ānu. Have a great day, everyone.
Tame, before you go, can I just, and sorry to jump in, an unusual bit of process, but can we just congratulate Tame for receiving a Paul Harris Scholarship at the Central Rotary 100-year celebration. Now, anybody who knows about that award knows that it's not given out very often. And yesterday was it yesterday or the day before? Sunday, Tim and I were privileged to be there to see him awarded. And you were taken by surprise, weren't you?
Yeah, it was so cunning. I was sitting next to him and I said, well, there's only one more award to go. I think I'll go out early. And he said to me, I'll just stay. It's only one more award. He already knew. He set me up. What a beautiful occasion, put it that way, to be honoured to receive that award. And I just go back and help our community as best as I can. And that's one thing, I've got a meeting very shortly, is for the community and little children. I can't tell you what happened to them, but something happened to those kids and they were in a safe home. So I'm going to do a blessing on that safe home for our children that are out there.
Well, thank you very much, Tame. And can we just add our voice to congratulations? You were honoured by Rotary, but at the same time they acknowledged that you were kaumātua for Hamilton City Council, kaumātua for Rotary, and the other good works that you have done, and the way in which you do them with such a beautiful, warm heart. And I just want to add our vote of thanks to you for being our kaumātua and the way that you conduct business in the council and how you set us up for really good meetings. We appreciate it.
Morena everyone, I'm Lance Vervoort, Chief Executive. I just wanted to quickly thank Mātua Tame. Thank you very much. As Paula said, I just wanted to reiterate that. You're always here for us and we very much appreciate that, and may that continue. A very warm welcome to everyone in the gallery today, and also a super warm welcome to our new elected member, Tim McIndoe. Welcome, Tim, to our whānau here. I hope that you enjoy your time at Hamilton City Council. I know you're chomping at the bit to get stuck into council business, and we really look forward to working with you, and I know you'll bring a lot of energy and gusto to what you do, and work collaboratively with staff and our elected members as well. So a very, very warm welcome. I'm going to hand back to Mayor Paula now, and we'll get into the more official part of the proceedings. Thanks.
Thank you. It's going to be my pleasure to confer on you the declaration and make you a real councillor. But I do want to just say we warmly welcome you to council. We know that you will be a strong asset to the council in our decision making. I feel for you somewhat for the baptism of fire that you're going to have today, with the really big decisions that we're making. If you wanted a light meeting to come in on first, you missed the mark there. But look, we're delighted with your success, and we work very collegially as a team. We welcome you as part of that. And now I'm going to get into the formalities. So, have you got the okay. So would you like... Congratulations again. I feel like Tim and I have worked together for a very long time, because I'm not sure how long you've been in politics, but I've been 22 and a bit years. So similar.
Yes, actually longer than that.
And our paths have crossed many, many ways, both professionally and personally. So it's a pleasure to have you read your declaration.
Thank you. I, Timothy Howley McIndoe, declare that I will faithfully and impartially, and according to the best of my skill and judgment, execute and perform in the best interest of Hamilton City the powers, authorities and duties vested in or imposed upon me as a member of the Hamilton City Council by virtue of the Local Government Act 2002, the Local Government Official Information and Meetings Act 1987, or any other act.
Well done. Tim, as we all did when we were sworn in, has the right to say a few words on his own behalf. So,
Tēnā tātou katoa, ngā mihi nui kia koutou, kia ora, good morning. Thank you, Mayor Paula, for your generous words, and Chief Executive Lance, for yours. Could I begin by thanking all of you who are present here. I have several supporters who I wasn't expecting to be here. Several of them helped me with my recent campaign. Actually two of them helped me extensively in my previous role as MP for Hamilton West. One was a former colleague. I won't name them all, but I do want to say a special welcome to our former Deputy Mayor, my predecessor as MP for Hamilton West, and my very dear friend, Martin Gallagher. I appreciate your huge commitment to our city, and I'm very honoured that you've chosen to be here today. Could I, in his absence, acknowledge, I guess, the reason why I'm here, and that is Ryan Hamilton and his election as our new MP for Hamilton East. And although he's not here, I do want to wish him well, as I'm sure we all do, in the important work that he has undertaken. I'm very sorry that Tame has left the room, but actually, Mayor Paula, you stole my thunder a moment ago, because yes, we both had the privilege of being with Tame, and I was just going to acknowledge what a fine man he is, and what an outstanding kaumātua that he is, both for our city and for several other organisations. I had the great privilege actually of working with his late wife, Sandy, before I even met Tame, and that was 20 years ago. Dear, dear lady who also had a great heart for our city. So I hope to be able to pass on those words to Tame shortly. I'm aware of the fact that this is not a time for longevity or for political speeches. So could I simply say to the voters of Hamilton East, thank you so much for putting your trust in me. I will work as hard as I can, both to earn that trust over and over again, to advocate for you in meetings here and whenever I'm on council business, to be an accessible councillor, and to honour the pledges that I made during my recent by-election campaign. And could I finish, lastly, by acknowledging the lovely lady in blue sitting in the front row over there, my dear wife Anne, who probably thought a few years ago, thank goodness that's all right, and has never been one to seek the limelight. Probably the last thing she would have wanted any partner in life of hers to do would be in public office. But she knows that community and public service have always been my passion, and she has supported me unfailingly in that, for which I'm deeply grateful. So again, thank you all for the warm welcome. Yes, this is an incredibly challenging time to be joining the council. I realise I probably do have rocks in my head, but maybe that'll help sometime as well. Nō reira, tēnā koutou, tēnā koutou, tēnā tātou katoa.
Councillors, and we will be taking an adjournment for a morning tea. And then we will
It's not so hard after all.
That's the easiest bit of the day.
Yeah.
So, so we'll do that adjournment and then we'll come back to the business, the big business of council today. So anybody who's a guest of Tim, of course, is welcome to join us for morning tea. And to any members of the public here will probably be about 20 minutes. And if you'd like to return after that, that would be great. But meanwhile, let's do the formals.
Okay, we'll do the first.
Well,
Is that the Thank you.
That does seem a bit formal, doesn't it? Thank you, everybody.
More so than usual.
Oh, you've lost your name already. All right, let's start the meeting. Just a few words of comment around. It's a really complex meeting with 3 or 4 really complex pieces of discussion to be had. My intention is to make sure, it might be a bit lumpy with the motions and various bits that might come up, as sometimes happens with these complex meetings. Let's just be patient with that, because I want everyone to have their chance to have their say on what they propose for the long-term plan. And as a consequence, from time to time, we will be taking adjournments potentially for drafting, potentially for head clearing, and just so that we're not rushed into making the decisions. But obviously, for the majority of us, we have had 3 or 4 months or more of conversation about some of this, so we don't need to turn every stone over from old ground, but just to cut to the gist of what we're doing today, the changes that are being proposed by some elected members, and get into that debate. I will try and go at a fair pace so that people are not left behind, because I think some of the conversation that we have will be quite nuanced and quite technical, and getting everyone to understand where we land is really important. And we'll take bits and pieces of the motions probably separately in some instances, just to make it easier for you to vote on particular elements. Ewan.
A procedural question. There was some discussion, I understood, regarding whether or not we were entitled to, as elected members, to relitigate
Yes, getting to that.
all aspects, and not just limited to Three Waters. And I understood we took some legal advice. I wonder if that could be explained.
Yep, absolutely. Are you explaining that, or was Mish explaining that? Yep. I think it was a legitimate question, because I will make the comment that it's unusual in an LTP at this point in the process to be able to change so much, but there are extenuating circumstances for that. Thanks, Mish.
The short answer to Councillor Wilson's question is yes. You're bound by your standing orders, and our assessment of the discussions to date are that there's nothing stopping matters outside the scope of the Three Waters topic being brought back. I think, to summarise, as long as you're within standing orders, it really comes down to convention and the practicalities of getting through your long-term plan process. If it was a normal LTP year, I would say to you that if you'd been through your consultation document audit already, that the possibility of breaching your legislative requirement to adopt by 30 June would be in danger. But however, we are not in a normal year. And I suppose the only thing to reflect on is just the capacity of staff to work with you to make changes and to bring your will into being.
Question, Mayor Paula, I wonder if, and it's still of a procedural matter, and that is the timing of consultation and the time pressures and those legislative frameworks. Have staff turned their mind to whether or not what flexibility we have in terms of the consultation period? What are now the new designated timelines?
Yes,
because that's a procedural matter. So
it is a procedural matter. We can answer it at the beginning, but I'd rather see how the day pans out in terms of what substantial decisions are made, and talk about that. But we have discussed there are some implications of delay, but also some benefits, of course, in socialising new material with the public. So I don't know if you want to say a very brief thing on that, Lance, but I don't want to get into a debate about it at the time, because we'll have it later.
You'll be aware that there has been some changes because of the Three Waters coming back into 10-year plans from the new government. So it gives council more time to consult and go through the process fully if it wants to. Just bearing in mind what Tracy's told us before, that if we go down that track and sort of get past the 1st of July, then we would start, it would create a lot of work which will cost money, extra work for the finance and rating team. We would collect our first rates notice, bills for the new financial year on an average of this financial year, and then the second one would be a catch-up, which could be quite substantial, which could catch out some residents. So there's that to bear in mind as well. And obviously the audit has changed a little bit around not having to have an audited consultation document, but have an audited final document. And obviously David and Tracy are just working with the audit team on that as well. So look, our advice is to stick to the plan, and notwithstanding some of the suggested motions that have been put forward later on in the meeting. But we can explain that a bit more fully later on if need be.
Thank you.
Sure.
Thanks, Mayor Paul.
And of course, that lies in the hands of the elected members also as to where we land on that. Let's come to that at the end. In terms of, right, so we'll just get into the agenda as it is. I'm going to move quite quickly through some machinery items, and then we'll get into bit by bit the draft long-term plan. First of all, we've got the confirmation of the open minutes on the 28th of November, and also move, and Deputy Mayor O'Leary will second. Are there any questions on that? Apologies. Oh gosh, sorry, forgot. Apologies. Thank you. We've got Councillor Tauriki for lateness, and Mark for early departure. Is that?
So I will be present for the whole day as
Excellent.
required.
And yeah, no, I'm getting to that one. And Milena is unwell, so you're joining us from home. Hello, Milena. Okay, so move those. It's been moved that the apologies be received. I'll second. All in favour? Carried. Confirmation of the agenda. I'll move that the agenda is as confirmed. It's seconded by Councillor Van Esten. All in favour? Carried. Are there any declarations of interest? Being none, we'll move on. Confirmation of the open council minutes. I've moved. Angela has seconded. All in favour? Carried. Confirmation of the minutes of the 14th of December. Also move. Deputy Mayor will second. All in favour? Opposed? Carried. All right, excellent. So we'll go now to the Chair's report, which I don't intend to dwell.
Mayor Paul, I would have put the minutes of the 28th of November as opposed to the 14th of December.
We did both. We did both. We did them in order. Yeah. Sorry, it was very quick, I know. And partly because as a consequence of those minutes, we are talking about many of the issues that are contained within the LTP anyway, so there'll be another opportunity to go there. Chair's report, I'm just going to take it largely as read. We can update now. Of course, we've welcomed Tim as the successful candidate. I've made a few comments that were written a little bit a while ago because everything moves quite quickly at times, so take any questions on that. And the only piece I want to talk about is the additional verbal part of the report. And councillors, you will be aware that members of the community have been asking us to release a statement as a council, not just myself, I've already done that, but as a council, on the situation between Israel and Hamas, the conflict and the effect it's having on innocent life. And we did do some work on that. We circulated some options to councillors. This was by far the preferred majority statement, which is the one that I'm proposing to release after this meeting with your support. It's in your hands. So as you can see, the words are up there. They have been drafted to reflect consistency with the government position. We do note, of course, Prime Minister Luxton has recently made a statement alongside Canada and others. So this is consistent, and we have discussed it because we didn't have a council meeting, but now this is the point to formalise that. So any questions on that, or any questions or comments? Thank you, Councillor Pike. I will move. Councillor Pike has seconded. Let's go to the vote. Oh, debate. Sorry. Ewan.
Thank you, Mayor Paula. My first comment in regards to the matter concerning Israel and Hamas is this really is not an area for local government. This is something that central government is involved in with foreign affairs. And I don't think we should be in the business of trying to express foreign affair policy. However, I don't think anyone in their right mind could not be horrified by the tragic loss of life, particularly triggered by the terrorist group Hamas's brutal and cynical kidnapping of hostages and killing of Israelis in October, and the subsequent tragic loss of lives of Palestinians as Israel responded. So I support the premise. Again, I reiterate, this is really an issue for central government, but I'm comforted by the fact that, and let's be honest, Hamilton is relatively insignificant in terms of foreign affairs. This is a role for central government. The most meaningful is the most recent tripartite letter from both Canada and Australia and New Zealand. However, I mean, at the end of the day, this is now an unfolding humanitarian tragedy. The reality is the solution, no doubt, will end up needing to be a two-state solution, and ironically, both Netanyahu and Hamas probably need to go to make that happen. But again, local government shouldn't be in a position of making comment on this. This is an area for central government.
Councillor Taylor.
Thank you, Ms Southgate. Look, I just want to just comment very briefly on the elements of transport in your Chair's report, the reference to taking stock of our transport work, and I welcome that. I do actually think it's high time, and I think it would be fair to say that a group of councillors have actually been trying to get this council to rethink some of these transport interventions for some time. I think our involvement as a council in Road to Zero and the SURF projects, which I see as essentially politically motivated funds from the previous government, have been especially damaging, I think, for this council's reputation. And do I even need to mention in-lane bus stops and raised platforms at roundabouts? So I'm really relieved to see that, 15 months into this term, there is some sign of realisation of that, and the Queen Mary is beginning to turn on it. But can I urge that this rethink, this taking stock, needs to be a substantial one and needs to be more than just stopping a few projects or delaying them. I think we need a deeper review of our transport strategies. There are some projects, big projects on our books, which I don't believe have community buy-in, and I think we need to address that. I would also point out that the Metrospatial Plan, which is the foundation strategy for a lot of this council's work, has two tenets, and I opposed it for this reason. One, it has an emphasis on high-density housing, and secondly, a radical transformation of our transport system. Radical transformation of our transport system. I would challenge you now to tell me that that is what the community out there actually wants, that that's what our community is telling us that they want that. I don't believe they do. Have we got a mandate for such an approach? Did we ever? I'm not sure. Well, I don't think we have. So I would actually like to see this council revisit that strategy and not just paper over the cracks, but review its direction in terms of transport. Thank you.
Councillor Casey Cox.
Thank you. Yeah, I just want to, I guess, acknowledge the process that we've gone through to develop the statement around the atrocities in Gaza. And I just want to, I guess, acknowledge the process we've gone through, because it was, I consider it a good process where we talked together and look to understand the issues more together, which is something that I'd like to see us do more of as a council. And I also want to acknowledge, Mayor Paula, your ongoing focus on housing affordability and your concern obviously around the proposed rates increase, and particularly our community's concern around the passing on of those rates to renters. And we know that renters in our community are the most stressed by our housing situation at the moment. So I guess I just want to acknowledge that, and also I guess, you know, a bit of a call to landlords to really consider the passing on of those rate increases to renters. I spoke with one last night who said she simply wouldn't pass it all on, which is great. And I think it's a good reflection for our landlords in the city to have around considering the rental stress in our community. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Naidu-Roth.
Just a short comment, Mayor Paula, in terms of your chair's report. Just want to acknowledge that you've asked the CE to look at the consultation process, because personally I think that's where a lot of the feelings out there could have been managed better in terms of how we're engaging. I hear from people in the community saying that they didn't know this was happening, or we were told it was happening but had no input into what the final feel and look was. So I think that the key step in that process is consultation, which is where we need to do better. So thank you for putting that in.
Thank you. I didn't debate the first instance, but I will. Oh, go, Councillor Thompson.
Ninja pushed the button there. I just wanted to say a few words in support of the statement we're putting forward today. We had, for a number of months, we've had members of our community ask for council to stand in unity with them and to express extreme, I guess, upset and concern over what's happening over in Gaza. It is horrific, and I think while as a council, you know, we don't have sway in the international community, actually it's still important that we are speaking out as a way to stand together with our community. Yeah.
Thank you. Thank you. I'll just make a few. Oh, no, I won't. Goodness me. Deputy Mayor.
This is what happens when you have a lolly scramble of a chair's report, and we're all talking about all sorts of things. Look, thank you, Mayor Southgate, for a chair's report and for welcoming us back. I certainly had a restful break, and I hope everyone else did, and that we bring the good mahi around the table and good collegial debate for the rest of the year. Thank you for also sending us the letter from Minister Simeon Brown around the three waters. It's good to see some kind of framework. I'm going to keep banging on about our council's responsibility to the people of the city to determine our own fate in this space, and we had a really good workshop and comments, I think it was last week, around the LTP with elected members in this room, and we talked about that. So a framework looks good. As you note, Mayor Southgate, in your report, that the Minister says that whatever structure we end up, whatever water services, how we deliver it, it must be transparent and affordable for ratepayers. And that's the key, isn't it, is affordable for ratepayers. I don't see in the letter from the Minister how we will determine affordable, how he will determine affordable, and that's the really tough thing. That's embedded in our Local Government Act, affordable rates. We know that 25% is not affordable rates, which is why I didn't support it back in December. So we've got a lot of work to do, and I hope that you've had a restful break as well, Mayor Southgate, because out of all of us you have the busiest and biggest workload, and I appreciate your hard work. And welcome to our newest councillor. Can I also, since I have time, mention that the former Councillor Gallagher, a good friend of both of ours, used to sit here for his first 2 terms and say, as the new councillor. So I think he's passed that baton on to you now as the new councillor. So I look forward to hearing that in your debate. Thank you.
There'll be at least one chance today to use it, I'm sure. Thank you. There's more, but wait, there's more. Councillor Donovan.
I won't use all of my 2 minutes, but thank you for your Chair's report, Mayor Paula, and for your words, Deputy Mayor Angela. As a fellow by-election winner, I can, relate to how Tim's feeling right at the moment. But what I would add is, just out of the Chair's report, you touched on infrastructure and sustainable infrastructure, and I would add that economic development will be a big winner if we can continue with sustainable infrastructure. And economic development will be one of the things that will drive this city even further. That's all I'd like to say. Thank you.
Councillor McIndoe. That's the first time I've said that.
Well, as the new councillor, I hadn't actually anticipated speaking this early, but I do just want to echo actually the comments that Councillor Wilson made a moment ago in relation to the proposed statement. All of us, I'm sure, not only in this room but throughout our community, have huge sympathy for the extraordinary suffering that all innocent people in this conflict are enduring at the moment. No question of that. But I do wonder how many in our community have actually called for us to make this statement. I am worried about the precedent that it sets. It will upset quite a few others in our community, even though it is fairly harmless and the statements are essentially positive. But I really strongly agree with Councillor Wilson that this is not the business, at least in my view, of local government, and that we would be better to stick to our knitting and to leave the statements of New Zealand's position to the New Zealand Government and Parliament.
Thank you. Councillor Van Oosten.
Thank you. I'll be brief, but will mention one of the other pieces of comment that you've made in your report with regard to the funding mechanism for local government. It is indeed broken, as you state, and I acknowledge the work that was done by the Future for Local Government Working Group that identified a number of solutions to be able to overcome that funding difficulty. One of those being to return the GST that we pay on rates, which equals about $40 million in Hamilton City Council's case. And should that come back to Council, we would be indeed halving the deficit that we'll face in the first year of our long-term plan. So with that in mind, leave that for today's meeting to contemplate. Kia ora.
Thank you. Yes, it's me. Okay, thank you. Just a couple of, just checking that nobody else popped up. Last chances, everyone. Just on the report, yeah, there is a lot in it, and it was written, of course, a little while ago, so things move on quite quickly. Just in terms of a few comments around Transport Three Waters and the statement. Angela and I began working on the process to improve the process and to review some of the projects. We have been listening. I think all of Council has been listening to the public's reaction to some of the transport projects, and we have listened, and Angela and I have been working on the process since mid-December, and again when we came back in mid-January, or I was back in mid-January. So we have heard the voice, but I just want to, I feel like sometimes I'm always pushed into being the voice of balance, because I just want to note that in the previous LTP, in the submissions, we had a very strong voice from the public, a very strong voice around the need for some safer cycling opportunities and some of the most dangerous intersections to be safer. That is woven into our vision statements, if those 5 visions actually. So we just do need to note that there are differing views. However, we accept, Angela and I have accepted, that things needed to change and be done better, and the process around, Jeff, you referred to having a process. We are working on a process that wraps up how we make the decisions, also how the public engage in the decisions that we make. So we have taken that seriously, and we are working on it with some pace, and it'll come back to you for your consideration when it has been worked through further. Just in terms of the Three Waters, we'll be talking quite a bit about that later on today, so I'm not going to go into detail, but mention the point around the economics. Gosh, that was quick. I was just going to make the point that we will be economically regulated by something that looks like a blend of the Commerce Commission and the Infrastructure Commission. Last sentence in respect of the statement, thank you for working with me on a statement. It was important to the community that we had a statement that was unified as a council. They weren't content just with my own personal statement. So I appreciate your support of it. So we'll go to the vote or to receive the report. I'll so move. Deputy Mayor, would you like to second? Second. Oh, you already moved it. Good on you then. No. Oh, that's all right. So it's been moved by me, seconded by Emma. Thank you. All in favour, please say aye. Aye. Opposed? Carried. Huh? What, Sarah? No, never mind. I was ready to go. Oh, I almost did buttons, but then, no, I didn't. Anyone opposed? No, all in, it's carried. Thank you. All right. Now we get into the real meaty business of the day, which is the updated draft long-term plan. James is going to set the scene for us and introduce it, and then bear with me and be as patient as we can with each other as we step through the very complex issues that are before us.
Thank you. Thank you, Mayor Paula. Kia ora koutou katoa, ko James Clark, tako ingoa. And welcome to Councillor McIntyre. You'll be pleased to hear my introductory remarks will be very brief, mainly because there were 3 points I wanted to make over and above what's in the report, and 2 of them have been addressed already. So I will just very quickly say something about the sort of report overall and the process, and then shortly Mairi and Jackie will talk specifically about the impact of adding 3 waters into the long-term plan. And then Tracy will touch on a couple of other related issues that have changed since November. And I know there are a couple of motions that we'll turn to later in the meeting as well and talk about what the impact of those would be as and when they're introduced. So just in terms of the overall process, the main thing that's changed since we wrote the report is that the government has now tabled the legislation which would repeal the all legislation regarding water service entities. That repeal will come into effect formally as of this coming Friday. So at that point, Council once again becomes responsible for delivering water services in all 10 years of the long-term plan. We touched briefly, well, we touched earlier following the question from Councillor Wilson around the flexibility that the government has given us, and we'll have to be flexible during the meeting, I think, to sort of see where we get to in terms of what our options might look like from here. One thing that changed last week is that the government, as well as the existing option of delaying our long-term plan, the government came forward with an extra proposal to allow us to delay the whole LTP by a year and just do an enhanced annual plan this year. Certainly our position as it stands is that that has very, I don't know, the Chief Executive sent you an email last week advising that from our perspective that has no real, well, there's no real need for that, and B, there's very little upside to it from our perspective, but we can take stock of that as we go through the meeting. And then finally, the other thing I was going to mention was just around what's sort of in the scope of this meeting, but Mish has clarified the position on that with regard to the standing orders. But at a high level, the purpose of this is we've adopted a draft long-term plan once. That was with waters only included for 2 years. We're now adding waters in for all 10 years, and there are some motions I know to in and around that of what else you might want to do in the budget now that we're adding waters in. I will leave my introductory remarks at that, but would anyone like to ask any, through you, Chair, would anyone like to ask any questions of the overall process before we get into the individual constituent parts?
No? Excellent, thank you. Going to talk waters. I think we'll be talking 3 waters a lot over the next few years, one way or another. Good morning.
Koutou. Ko Mairi Pōra tōku ingoa. Since the government announcement in December to change the direction for 3 waters reform, staff have been working to include waters revenue and cost into the draft LTP. So this has included reviewing and refining the capital program, the renewals and compliance and operational programs with a focus on years 3 to 10. So no changes have been made to years 1 and 2 of the Waters program that was included in the draft LTP that was approved at the 28th of November council meeting. Given the extremely condensed time frame, our focus has really been on the big ticket items only during our review process. So the report and relevant attachments outline the changes that have been proposed to the Waters program for years 3 to 10. However, I thought it would be useful just to provide a high-level summary of what those changes are. So in terms of the operational program, the funding requirement for the Waters operational program has increased, and it looks to add an additional $50 million of direct operational costs across a 10-year period. The Water Services Act and establishment of Taumata Arawai as the water regulator are driving higher expectations and requirements across all three waters activities. However, there's still a lot of uncertainty around future changes to compliance requirements. More change is signalled and expected, but no details are known. So the changes to the OPEX program that we're talking about today do not include those future unknowns. The increased operational costs are predominantly being driven by the consequential operational impacts of the capital programs, and the need also for increased condition assessment to prioritise and optimise both maintenance and renewals programs. There's also a need for some key shifts around improving data, asset and maintenance planning, demand management and expansion of current quality and risk processes to meet future compliance requirements. So the changes to the operational program are referred to in paragraph 55 of the report and in attachment 8. In terms of the capital program, the revisions made are largely focused on the renewals and compliance, citywide waters and central city programs. So we've retained the prioritisation principles that were used for those programs in November 2023. And within that program, there has been an increase of $260 million proposed across years 3 to 10 in the Three Waters Renewals and Compliance program from what was seen in Scenario B back in November. This increase is really indicative of the levels of renewals that's going to be required over the next 10 to 20 years, and that's a reflection of the age of the city and where historical development of waters infrastructure such as pipe networks and treatment plants has occurred. The additional costs are also impacted by the significant increased cost to deliver renewals because of increased contractor costs, the complexity of the work involved and some new compliance requirements. However, to offset increased renewals and compliance program costs, staff have reviewed the spend profile and of some of the larger programs in the wider capital program and look to deliver these over a much longer time span, so generally 15 years instead of 10. The overall result of these changes is a reduction of $164 million to the citywide waters and city central capital programs in the 10-year period. And the summary of which three waters capital projects were affected can be found in paragraph 38 of the report. Overall, combining the increased cost for the proposed renewals and compliance program in combination with the proposed cost reductions from rephasing other large projects within the wider capital program, the overall impact on the capital program is an increased funding requirement of $74 million. So the capital program summaries, including renewals and compliance for Three Waters, can be found in attachment 4 and 7. So with the change in government direction, there is now an opportunity for Council to choose to reconsider including a funding provision in the draft LTP for water demand management universal water metering project at an estimated cost of $53 million. So this is intended as a funding provision only, and staff would still need to develop a detailed business case which would be presented to Council for further decision making prior to any implementation of the program. Staff have developed a financial scenario where universal water metering is included in the 10-year program for councillors to consider, and that outcome of that modelling is in attachment 6 of the report. And finally, as requested during the 7th of February briefing, a high-level overview has been included in the report to outline some of the pros and cons of differing time options for the implementation of the Water Demand Intervention Programme, and you'll find that overview in attachment 5. And at that point, Jackie and I are happy to answer any questions.
Thank you very much. There's a lot to digest in there. Some, of course, has been through workshops and some has just moved more laterally with the numbers. But Councillor Bidder.
Thank you, Mayor Paula. In the Waikato Times a few days ago, there was an article that mentioned the 14% loss of water in our pipes. And it gave a 95% confidence interval of plus or minus 22%, which could mean that we're losing as much as 36% of our water. Could you further explain that? Like, is that realistic, or how are we measuring our actual water loss?
Yeah, there are some difficulties with measuring water loss because we don't have universal water metering in place. So we are reliant on the meters that we have, the bulk meters that we have in place to estimate that. So there is a lot of assumptions that need to be calculated. We engage a specialist consultant to come in and help us with those assumptions. So it's a fair, independent assessment. But there is a large uncertainty in that figure. And so for a result of 14%, it could be anywhere between, I think, about 10% and 22% water loss. But that's the best we can do with the data we have.
I understand.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Deputy Mayor.
Thank you. Ms Southgate, thanks, Murray, for your report. I have a question for you and then possibly a question for the Chief Executive. Murray, through the water stimulus funding of 18.6 million that we previously got and did some amazing work around the city, one of the projects on there that I popped on the list, you know what I'm going to ask, was around a ratepayer scheme for residential water tanks. I believe we went and did some work because that was a project that was funded. It has never circled back round to my table or council's table. Can you just tell me what's happened with that? And yeah.
Yeah, so there's been some really good, the report was completed and it helped support some of the changes that were proposed for the district plan in terms of sensitive water devices. So that's for new properties. The area of, I guess, concern was more in the existing properties, and without there being a strong incentive for individual benefit, it was very hard to actually get the value that you would invest in incentivisation of rain tanks. But one of the benefits of universal water metering is that people will get that individual benefit and of putting in a rain tank if that offsets the cost of water that they're actually paying for. So that would definitely be something that would be enabled by water metering being put in place.
I think I still might request and perhaps take it offline with the General Manager, because I would really like to have had that conversation and understand that, why you came to that conclusion, So CE, and maybe this is for the General Manager, I'm not sure. We are being asked today to include the 53 million for universal water metering. I expressed my discomfort with the cart before the horse type stuff with Three Waters. So can someone explain to me why we would do that today when we haven't decided what our future in the Three Waters space will look like?
I think it's as we go forward, and obviously there's a whole lot of uncertainty about how water is going to be delivered. I know the government's repealed the legislation last week, and that'll go through Royal Ascension in the next wee while. Is if we do look at a number of options, then making sure that we have that financial provision in our budget rather than waiting to do an LTP amendment later on. And I think obviously it's very clear from the resolution that there be a business case. There's no decision being made by council, and I think probably the words the word that might be missing out of the recommendation there is the word consultation. So there's, I think it's just being clear with people what the costs would be if you look at water demand management and if universal water meters are in there. Like council can decide today whether they want to put that in or not. That's up to the councillors. We think it's prudent that we do, so it actually flags to either ourselves or to any other potential vehicle that's delivering water in the future that that is an option. But you do have the option of not putting it in.
Because I guess the reality is there is no way in the world that we could do this in this first 3 years. I mean, I see the funding is from year 3 onwards anyway, so it sits outside the current LTP because 10-year plan is always a 3-year budget round. Just in terms of the business case, I think is at 1.5 million. Is that seriously? Given that there are other territorial authorities around us that have metering, we could surely learn from them. And if we cut the price in half and put that in the budget, not the 53 million, would that enable staff to start that work? And does that also pay for the work that we might have as a governance body to decide what the future of our water delivery will be?
I'm going to defer to these experts down here. Jackie, I'm sure Jackie's got the answer.
No, kia ora koutou. Look, I think if you were wanting to reduce the available budget, then we'd have to revisit the scope. So what we talked about at the 7th of Feb briefing was that the scope does include for really getting being able to quantify the implications on deferred investment to relatively high level. Engagement as well was included in the scope. So if you had a mind to reduce the budget, we'd have to look at the scope.
So Jackie, you're saying then that the budget that we decide today does absolutely include the work that we need to make a decision of the future of Three Waters as well as universal water metering?
No, it doesn't include the work that we would have to do to consider the future of water services delivery. No, this is just around universal water metering.
So can you just explain to me why on earth it would be 1.5 million?
There's a lot of work that goes into developing a detailed business case. We typically use the Treasury Better Business Case model. So that sets out 5 different cases, and it's just a matter of working through not just the business case itself, but some of the technical work that's needed to support the business case.
And do we have budget then? Are you asking for budget to do the wider work around whether we retain Three Waters in-house or whether we join up? Is that a separate budget line somewhere?
Well, we don't have any money for it at the moment. I think we mentioned that the other day. Apart from some of the transition funding we were getting through the previous government's water reform, which
is due to run out.
So there is an issue there, and obviously we need to look at those 3 options we discussed and then look at staff resourcing and also what external resource we need. Look, we think we're okay for this financial year, and what we're going to do is come back to council, do some work. Obviously the Merrill Forum's doing a whole bunch of work in quite a, to be honest, cost-effective way. We're looking at following this similar approach and then bring that back so that we can give you some definite numbers. I know it's not ideal with the timing of the 10-year plan and that sort of thing, but we're looking at that by mid-year. So unfortunately, the timing around our 10-year plan hasn't been ideal, but we would have to look at that going forward. But look, I can't give you any indicative figures. I'd hate to guess. I think Blair's probably twitching in the background and probably thinking of what we spent when we working with Waipa and Waikato councils several years ago.
Okay, thank you, CE. So, Mayor Southgate, I'd just indicate that I might have a separate motion for Part E when we get there. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Casey Cox.
Yeah, well, just quickly to follow on from Deputy Mayor's question around that quantum that it would take, is the work that we did all those years ago still relevant? Like, are you able to pick up on that or not?
The answer is yes. Most of it, Blair, I presume, and then and Blair might want to jump in as well. Also, there was a lot of work done by the National Transition Unit, which is now being disestablished. There's been a lot of modelling work done. There's been a lot of information gathered, so none of that's lost. So it's all there, and it's just about grabbing it in the right bits and then putting it in the right form.
Okay.
A lot of that investment that's happened previously isn't lost, that would be used.
That's great.
But Blair might just want to...
Yeah, look, I think, and interestingly, the department have already reached out to seek some of the information that we learned from the last process. As Lance has said, there's a lot of information that's really particularly valuable, and we may also look to utilise some of the expert advisors we had from that process to help us in terms of any future work that we do as well.
Great, thank you. You've answered the questions I had pretty much already, but just on attachment 8, I guess the operating costs, I'm just interested because in November, I mean, I know it's all shifted, but we were looking at deficits in year 1 and 2, and now we're looking at surpluses. So I'm just interested in how that's, or why that's happened, or if you can just quickly explain that to me.
In terms of the water's operational costs?
Yeah.
So the water's operational costs that were included in scenario B back in November did not include, or they were a reflection of what was shared with DIA. So they were very much focused on direct costs only and not the indirect costs. And so we've had to review those also in line with some of the compliance requirements that have come into place, and make sure that we can continue to meet our compliance requirements. So that's what's driven that significant increase in those operational costs.
Yeah, it's more the allocation of the income that seems to have increased, that we're allocating a greater proportion of rates potentially to operating costs in those first 2 years, or I'm not reading that correctly?
I might need to seek Tracy's assistance on that one.
Councillor Anna, could you just ask me that question again? Because it might be the answer that I just was... Are you talking about rubbish and recycling, or are you talking about water?
Oh, no. I'm just talking about the waters. Just a question around that. It looks to me like we're just allocating more of our rates budget to waters in the first couple of years now.
So you know your question around rubbish and recycling, it's the same answer. So basically after that November meeting, we obviously then technically have a revenue budget because you've obviously increased the rates to the 25. And for our reporting, we then have to go and recut that against all the activities. So you'll remember that we have transport activities, rubbish and recycling, and all those sorts of things. So what we've done is we've picked up everything from all our financial statements. We rolled all of the decisions you made in November through all of those, including the rates, and we recut those activity statements. So that's the difference between what you saw originally in November and what you were seeing today. And obviously after today, we'll recut that again based on today's decisions.
So we can't see the full suite of operating rejig?
No, not at the moment, because it obviously moves.
Okay, thank you.
Councillor Thompson.
Thank you, Mayor Paula. Thank you, Jackie and Mari. I've just got a question as well on the business case. Given, I guess usually we do these really giant, expensive business cases when we have to get co-funding for things and stuff. Is it necessary in this case to follow the Treasury better business case model, or could we do what we think is necessary for good decision making?
We don't have to follow the Treasury BBC model to the letter, but I do think that it provides good discipline and structure and evidence base for informed decision making. So our own internal business case process adopts the 5 case methodology. it is pulled back somewhat from what Treasury would typically require. So I think the answer is the framework and the methodology provide good discipline and good informed evidence for your decision making. We don't necessarily, and we wouldn't necessarily follow every element in the Treasury Better Business Case methodology. But like I said earlier, as part of developing the business case, often you need the technical investigations as inputs into the business case. And I expect that there will need to be some specific technical investigations that we don't currently have, or we're not currently programmed to deliver, that are required to inform the business case. So the two things, it's not just the business case itself, it would also be providing some of the technical inputs that's needed to inform the business case.
And what are the options that would essentially be looking at? So when we look at the business case, it's helping us to make a decision, not just do we put in meters or not, but there would be other options around that?
Yeah, so typically you would have a range of options similar to what we've got in the paper. So do nothing, roll it out over a certain amount of time, roll it out over a longer period. There were nuances in terms of the technology that you might utilise as well that you'd want to look at. All the way through the business case, you're assessing different options. So different management options, different back office options, different procurement options. So it's not just, one set of options around whether you do or don't, or you deliver it over a period of time. You are looking all the way through at, is there a case for it? That's the first thing. What are your technical options? And there's many different iterations that would be considered as part of that, and then the financial implications of that, how you might procure it, what's needed to actually manage the system. So there's a whole heap that sits inside the business case process.
Okay, thank you, that's helpful. And sorry, a final question on the business case. Which would be the parts of the scope that would drop out if, say, it was reduced by a third, as an example?
I think we would still need to undertake all of the cases and the key steps. I think what you would pull back on is how detailed some of the investigations that are used to inform the business case can be. Yeah.
Okay. All right, thank you. Gosh, I had another waters question, and that was around the renewals, and we've talked about this before, but I just wanted some more clarity again on when we're going in to do renewals in areas where we would reasonably be expecting to enable greater density in the future, whether it's now or years to come, like say Hamilton East or Stage 1. To what extent do we have enough funding to upsize and reduce the risk of having to rip up the road in 10 years' time?
We have included provision across all three waters for an upsize component. In the past, that's really been targeted at greenfields, sort of developer-driven upgrades, and wanting to make sure that the infrastructure is bigger from the start. But our thinking around those three lines are in citywide waters is that they would be available to support renewals, because we in the past haven't had budget as part of renewals to upsize the pipes at the same time. So we have made some budget provision in the citywide waters program for each of the three waters for that.
Okay, and is it adequate, like in terms of will we still be potentially putting back some pipes that aren't as big as they should be, just to understand, I guess, what level of risk we are looking at in terms of, putting in, whether we're putting in the adequate sized infrastructure?
That's a really difficult question to answer. I think, we would always like more budget, but we have looked at the deliverability of the renewals program alongside what we've seen historically in the developer space. So we think that based on historic spend, that we've pitched it at a good level in the proposed LTP, but like I say, we would could always do with more, so that we're able to deliver more. But that deliverability element is something that we've thought about quite closely.
Okay, all right. Thank you, Jackie. Thanks.
Councillor Wilson.
Yeah, thanks, Mayor Paula. Thanks, Jackie and Mairi. Look, I've got a couple of questions, if I could. Can I first ask you, in your approach to both the former government and the new government's approach to Three Waters, because you've been immersed in it, do both strategies have some commonality in the sense of the need for a mechanism to reduce water consumption in the form of water meters?
It's a very interesting question. I can't. Yeah, I'm not quite sure how to respond to that.
All right, maybe another way of...
Andrew might...
If I may, neither reform proposal has been prescriptive on meters, and the current reform proposal puts all the responsibility for decision making back with the councils for meters. So there's nothing prescriptive that I'm aware of in the previous reform approach and the new reform approach.
All right. So Andrew, as a subsequent question to that, I'm a little surprised by that answer, but let's dive deeper. Have you not read any reference or policy guidelines either from the former government or this government about water management and water consumption reduction? And have you not read or are you not aware of any other summary comment either from a minister about the importance of the practicality of water meters and how beneficial they could be?
Doesn't let Andrew talk to the rest? Is that okay?
Sorry, Mayor Paula, I know you're a political figure. I'm wanting an impasse, and I'm not being harmful in that comment.
No, I just thought you might be interested in my most recent conversations with the ministers.
Maybe both. Could I have it from staff?
Yep, sure.
And then maybe, yeah.
You're quite right. There's a lot of narrative around meters and revenue and charging models, and there's been commentaries made from a range of parties, political and otherwise, around meters. But when you look at the legislative provisions, it's the legislation which is our guiding document is silent on the provision of meters. So both the bills that have now been repealed or about to be repealed on Friday and the repeal legislation that was tabled recently, they're all silent on meters. It's simply, from my perspective, a narrative in the public domain.
And what was that narrative?
There's a view that meters are required in the context of understanding the cost of water. From my perspective, for Hamilton, we've got an issue around allocation and how far that allocation goes. So when you have a meter debate, and this goes to the business case consideration, you really need to understand what your primary driver is behind meters when you make your metering decisions. So it probably goes a little bit fuller than the question.
Mayor Paul, I want your thoughts, but you've raised an issue, and Mayor Paula, do you want to answer do you want to give me your
Sure.
your understanding?
If it's helpful, since this new election, I've had a couple of conversations, and to be fair and reasonable, they have been more casual in nature, although we have formally written to the ministers, who have both indicated that, who've both asked the direct question, are we metered? And I've said no. And I've taken from their reaction and their broad statements that demand management is critical and that metering is likely to be required under this new economic regulator. I'm not sure what you're hearing from the ministries, because of course I deal with ministers and staff deal with officials from the ministries. But the conversation through the mayoral forum, through the National Council, Metro Sector and those other things I sit on, is along those lines, that what everybody is hearing from the ministers is that demand management is critical, and that comments have been made that meters are the most effective way of measuring your demand. That's all I've heard.
That's really important, and I appreciate that comment. Andrew, just one further question, if I could, of you. Under the former government's Three Waters policy, if it had been totally enshrined and Mega Entity B took over the responsibility of our water, who would have decided, who would have made the decision of whether or not water meters were implemented?
Under that reform proposal, the entity responsible for water would have made that decision.
So if I was the government creating a piece of legislation, I don't need to specify I want water meters. I just need to empower an entity who could make the decision and keep it out of the political debate.
It would not have been a political decision.
Thank you. All right. So coming back to the experts, it would clearly see that whether it was red or blue, water meters were implied. Why? Why do both political parties think that water meters is an important thing? What's the data?
So water meters are a very effective water demand management tool. It's not the only water demand management tool, and over the past 10 years we've invested in education and water loss as a water demand intervention. However, in New Zealand there is documented outcomes from supplies that have been metered, which have resulted in significant savings in water use. For example, Kapiti Coast, once they installed water metering, they reduced their average daily demand by 26%. Over in Tauranga, when they installed water meters, I believe that it was around 25% reduction and 30% reduction in peak water demand, which is where which drives a lot of infrastructure planning. So there are some very, very, very good evidence around the effectiveness of water meters as a demand management tool.
Thank you. I've only got two more questions, Mayor Paula. Turning our mind now to the equation of cost of the introduction of water meters, some $50-odd million. Seems an incredible amount of money. But let's talk about the practicality of what that means in terms of cost to council, in light of the fact that it's going to be funded by CapEx. And maybe this is a question for Tracy. Tracy, could you tell me roughly what the actual ramifications of borrowing the $50 million to enable the introduction of water meters? One question. And two questions. The second question is there an early indication as a result of spending that money now that we could delay spending critical water infrastructure by a little bit?
The second part of the question first. So like we shared at the briefing, we don't expect that there'll be a significant impact on the 10-year program that we've put forward. What the impact in terms of deferring investment might look like beyond that is something that we would look more closely at through the business case process. And I think it also depends on the timing of the rollout. So in our program that we've put forward, we've had quite a slow rollout, but if you wanted to compress the rollout to occur in a much shorter time frame, then you're likely to see the benefits earlier.
Right. And Tracy, I mean, I'm hearing a lot of narrative from people saying, oh, we're broke, we can't afford to fund the $50-odd million. What's the actual cost in terms of interest a year to fund the water meters, please?
That's a really great question, and it's not something that I can answer easily because it really depends on all the other decisions that you're actually going to make today. Again, as we've talked about, it depends on, it's all about cash flow for us at the moment and the timing of that cash flow. So as you know, it's our debt to revenue and the capital spend in those later years that are affecting the rates that we are looking at in those first couple of years. So in isolation, not an easy answer, but certainly at the end of today, if it's something that you wanted us to model, we can certainly look at that on top of all your other decisions.
Final question, if I could, to the Chief Executive, just for clarification. So having, let's say, made the decision we're going to invest in water meters that we know data tells us saves water consumption and potentially helps us, that doesn't box us in the sense that whether we ultimately land on creating a CCO or whether we create a sort of a regional CCO that manages more than just our this important investment in water meters is easily transferable to these new entities if we choose to create them?
Correct, and depending on the structure of those, which we aren't completely sure about yet, the government's talking about in the legislation in July that they might give some indication about what new mechanisms might be in those CCO structures. You're right, it won't be lost, but and there'll be time to revisit, look at a business case, those sorts of things. The one rider on that is if they make it a CCO that, in your questioning with Andrew before, had a whole lot of decision-making powers and had a statement of intent with the shareholder councils and that sort of thing, where would the decision-making lie, I think, and that's probably something we need to keep abreast of going forward.
Right, but just final question is, with every bit of information you have, as the Chief Executive, you are comfortable with your staff saying it makes sense that we budget for the introduction of water meters at a time to come and to enable us to start doing some of the planning?
Correct, and I think just from what Myri was saying, just that's based on the information we have to hand and the analysis we've done of what's happened in other areas previously.
Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Van Oosten.
Thank you very much. If we could go back to Deputy Mayor Angela's questions with regard to the business case. The proposal is that that be funded in year 3 and that would be 2026/27. How long do you expect that a preparation of a business case would take?
So I suggested at the briefing up to 12 months.
Yeah. And so that then takes us into the year of 2027/28. And should then council decide that water meters would be a reasonable response after assessing that business case and looking at the merits from that, what period of introduction might or rollout of those water meters entail?
For the purpose of what we've put forward, we've spread it over a 10-year window, the implementation. But there are examples in other metros where they've delivered it in a much shorter time frame. It just depends on, I guess, the efficiencies that can be gained from doing that, the budget implications of doing that. So it's something that we would look at as part of the detailed business case. But for the proposed LTP, we've spread it over 10 years, and the last couple of years extend beyond the 10-year window.
Right, yeah, I see that. Certainly if you're expecting that year 3 be the business plan, the year 4 then, the completion of that, there's only 6 years to introduce the water meters from there.
So our programming is to deliver the implementation, so installing the water meters across the city over a 10-year window. Because we pushed out the start date to year 3, that just extends the tail of the delivery based on the high-level thinking that we've done to date. But we'd look at that more closely as part of the business case.
So the Minister's letter talks about having a better understanding of the direction of travel and about details that would be worked through. We'd have a very clear understanding in that time frame then of what that direction of travel is, presumably?
In terms of the water meter decision?
In terms of the overall water's direction.
Might pass that over to
Yeah,
Lance.
the answer is yes.
And Hamilton's position in the, I guess, what our future might be as a standalone or alongside others in either our direct region or beyond. We'll have those decisions able to be grappled with at that time?
Well, from my point of view, I think it would be prudent, but legally you won't have to. We can carry on doing waters as we're doing it now. But with the work that's happening at the moment, we will have to submit a water plan to the government once they pass legislation within 12 months, which, as Jackie's explained before, that there's a whole lot of new requirements around the economic regulator and also around Te Mata Arawai's water quality standards too. So we will have to respond to that once that legislation happens, and we'll have 12 months. And I think those water plans will get a lot of analysis from the government, and if they don't believe they are right, they will let us know that, and then I suspect there will be backup provisions for them to work with councils who don't get those water plans right. But essentially the answer to your question is yes, but legally we could carry on doing what we're doing as long as we meet those water plans that we submit.
Okay. Part of that business case also, Jackie, would be, you talked about a consultation process just on the water meters. I guess there's a lot more that our public will want to know and have input into. How might we be able to use the time between now and potentially 2027/8 in order to be able to have a conversation with our public about what the importance of water is, and be able to capture up their views as well?
Yeah, I think we could certainly do a lot better at informing our communities around what's involved in providing water services to them. I think utilising existing engagement opportunities in your neighbourhoods, different projects, water-related projects where there's an opportunity to engage with a broader sector of the community. I think we need to take those. The City Waters team do quite a lot in the education space, but really just being out in the community, talking about the services that we provide, the environment that we rely upon to provide those services, and some of the challenges that go along with that, alongside some of our, our major capital investment program. So I think, just getting out in front of our community, potentially thinking about how we incorporate that into a broader comms strategy from council is something that we could should look at. And that's where the expertise of our communications team really comes in, I think.
We've been criticised about getting ahead of our public in a number of different initiatives that we take on. With a program that you've discussed, would there be the opportunity to bring our public with us and maybe not use the same advertising company that drew a frog in a muddy pool?
I'm just looking around to see if there's anyone from the comms team. But I think if we look at some of our major projects, they in and of themselves will require us to really engage with our community. And so tacking on to some of those big projects so that we're talking more broadly about waters in a more integrated way is one way we can do that, and utilise existing budgets as well. So we do have significant budgets for some of those other capital programs, which do include and have to include engagement with our communities and key stakeholders. So I think there's lots of opportunities. I'm looking over my left shoulder at the comms team, and I'm sure they're hearing what you're saying, Councillor.
Kia ora. Thank you,
Could I
Jackie.
just jump
Thank
in
you.
there and just
Yeah,
say,
you can.
Hastings District Council do an outstanding job on this after their hiccup in 2016. They got Waiaraha, which is basically a water treatment plant in an urban area in Hastings District. It's got an education centre. It tells the story brilliantly, and they're open to working with other councils who can actually utilise the resources that they've developed. And if you ever get a chance, if you're down in the Hawke's Bay, go to it. It's outstanding. And you know, water treatment plants may not be the sexiest thing to everyone, but even I got excited when I went there.
Thank you.
Councillor Pike.
Thank you, Mayor Paula. Just a few quick questions. In terms of our allocation and consent for water in Hamilton, how are we tracking for using this allocation considering Hamilton's projected population growth?
So at the moment, based on our current growth projections and our current use of water, it is likely that we will utilise all of our allocation before our consent expiry. So we have a staged water consent which allows up to a total of 146,000 cubic metres of water a day in 2044. And at this stage we're looking to utilise that well before 2044.
Thank you. And what efforts have been made to date to reduce consumption, and how effective has this been?
So we've, over the past 10 years, we've had a lot of focus on education. So we have what we call a smart water program, and that involves a lot of engagement with schools. So we go out to early childhood, primary and secondary schools, and really, I guess, share that understanding of what water is and why it's important, how it is taken from the river and used and treated and used, and also how it circles back into wastewater and the like. So there is a really well-developed program there. We also obviously have our Smart Water Summer program, which is really focusing on the peak summer period of the year, where when needed we can put in water restrictions which can reduce water use, especially outdoor water use. We've also had a large investment in water loss, and in particular in recent years we've been sectorising the city into water supply zones that will help us to target water loss in particular areas of the city and reduce that 14% that we were talking about earlier.
Wonderful. But I guess despite all this great work and efforts, we're still looking, as you say, to project to be in deficit or run out of the allocation.
Yes, that's right. So the when the resource consent was applied for back in 2009, there was obviously it was based on the growth projections at that time. It did not include any provision for industrial wet industry use. So we are now in a position where growth has outstripped that growth projected at the time of the resource consent application, and we've got industrial use that we're incorporating. So it is, there is a need for us to use that resource sustainably.
So, Councillor, if I may, just to be really clear, we do not have sufficient allocation for the land that's zoned. And we have done a lot of work over the last 10 years around interventions on the edges. So there's education. All of the new reservoirs that have been built across the whole city have created demand zones. So those local communities, take Rototuna, just see a lower water pressure rather than the whole city wide. So just to manage what's available for use. But we're getting to the end of the interventions, and there is no new allocation on the table. So there's a gap in allocation.
Wonderful, thank you. Last question is, I think you've mentioned it earlier in response to other questions, but just can you confirm that the water meters are an effective way to reduce water management demands?
Based on experience in other water supplies, yes, they are a very effective water demand management intervention.
Thank you.
Spending a lot of time on this, so we are going to, most people have had questions. I'm going to go to Tim, then you can have one more question. Sarah, I'll have a question.
Thank you, Mayor Paul, and thank you, Councillor Sarah. This is really just a very quick supplementary question. In the middle section of Councillor Emma's questions a moment ago, she asked you about the measures that were being undertaken. You gave us a very good, clear answer on the education, but I don't think I heard the answer to her second question, was what were the actual results of that education program to date? What data do we have available on how much water consumption has been lowered as a result of the work that you've done prior to this consideration of water metering?
So I guess education is a very, it's a hard action to get a tangible water saving from, or to calculate the water saving from. We see it as an investment in the future residents and community of Hamilton, that they understand the importance of water and can make decisions on how they interact with our water services in a more sustainable way. So it's really, really difficult to put
I appreciate it's difficult,
on.
but effectively the answer is we don't know.
We don't know, yeah.
One more question, Sarah?
Last question, it was just, I saw in a newsroom article there was comment that the likes of LGFA and lenders would probably have a strong preference for councils having water meters, if we're looking at potential solutions with them. What would be our options if it's currently starts year 3 that we do a business case? What would be our options then if they say, well, actually, we want you to do that faster in order for us to agree to lift your debt limits, for example? I mean, would we just essentially have to then go back and do a revision to the budget?
Yeah, we'd have to review our 10-year plan, or make a change through the annual plan.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yep. Okay. Thank you.
Just from myself, in terms of the choices for Hamilton at the moment, we are proposing that money sets a budget aside for the installation of water meters at some future stage if we go ahead with it. The amount that is just attributable to a business case, so if we put in the budget the business case but didn't, given that water entity may come about or something may change in that space, what does that look like? And can you see any concerns with taking that approach?
So I think that's presented as one of the options in attachment 5. One of the issues with taking that approach is that we wouldn't be able to capitalise the investment, and so it would have to come from operational funding.
Right. Okay, and that has a bit more of an impact on debt to revenue, therefore, right? Pardon me? So, do we know what that is? We don't. We could calculate that, I guess. Okay, second question. So, because I think the public with the term water demand program will consider that we are definitely going to install water meters rather than do the business case. From the minister's letter, I'm just trying to find it again. It makes it quite clear that the timeline is quite compressed, with a lot of work to be done by mid-2024, which is months away, and then establishing settings and beginning the transition to a new way of doing business. Let me put it that way, because we don't know what it looks like, by mid-2025. So do you read from that the government is going to be quite fast-paced and pressuring encouraging councils to find new ways of managing their water. Andrew? We haven't got I'm talking to the amount of time that we've got to think this through, really, basically.
Well, my view is we have time to make a considered approach, to the provision of water services as a whole. So we always had waters in for 2 years. The recent communication from the Minister around the legislative timeframes, supports that 2-year runway, and through the work through mayoral forum, there'll be consideration given to a number of options. In the meantime, that dovetails quite nicely, I think, with the legislative program, which sees new legislation coming through, middle of this year, and then, with any provisions being enacted mid-2025. So I think we've got a reasonable time frame, and we're not under pressure to make decisions today per se.
Okay.
I'm not sure if Lance wants to add anything to that comment.
Yeah.
No, I agree. I think, at pace that you're asking me, Paula, I think, yes, at pace within the timeframes that was in the Minister's letter. I don't think I want to be councils hanging around for 7 years deciding on what they're doing. I think because then they will use their regulators to make sure that the results that are required are achieved.
My understanding, am I right, Andrew, is that the economic regulator will be one of the first things that they put in place alongside Taumata Arawai, which is the quality regulator already in place?
Yeah, there's 2 forms of regulation in place. There's environmental, largely passed through regional council in terms of consent compliance. Then there's the drinking water standards, Taumata Arawai regulations. Both governments have actually been really clear on the need for economic regulation. So, even though the current government repealed the economic regulation provisions, it's very clear in the Minister's communication that around the middle of this year, they're going to start and establish foundational disclosure requirements as a first step towards economic regulation, with the full power of economic regulation being enacted in 2025. So it's coming.
Thank you. And that disclosure that they'll require will be looking at the cost efficiency and effectiveness of water. So we're probably going to be compared with exemplars one way or another.
There's no detail, but the Minister's very, very clear in this written communication. They're looking at investment, they're looking at a phrase called revenue sufficiency. There's a whole range of considerations that are going to be brought to bear. But until we see the draft bill, which I believe is going to be around the middle of this year, I don't have a lot of detail at this stage. But economic regulation, that third form of regulation, is likely coming.
Just last question then. If nothing were to change and Hamilton were to, because we've got 3 options, haven't we, Lance, if that's what we're proposing, which is, obviously Hamilton retaining all its own water services kind of thing, which as a base proposition, working with some of the fast growth metros, particularly Tauranga, in terms of how you deal with a fast growing city. And then there's that regional method, that regional approach that the mayoral forum is driving through. So there's 3 options, right? At the end of the day, though, if nothing happens, what happens to, when do we breach our debt to revenue ratio as a result of waters going back in years 3 to 10? We do quite quickly, don't we?
Yes, we do. So that's on paragraph 77 in your report. So we breach in year 4.
Okay, thank you. Now, Angela has indicated that she has... Oh, Councillor Worthington, one other question?
Yeah,
just one?
Just one, because it's to the Chief Executive or to Blair. I understand there's potentially an amendment that would simply fund the business case but strip out the funding of the water meters. Just from a best practice point of view, is it wise to fund a business case and not have provisions for a known consequence of potential significant expenditure? I mean, I guess the question is, justify why you've said it's important we put it in. Right? It's as simple as that. Because if it wasn't important, you wouldn't have done it. I wouldn't have assumed.
I think it's about intent, and if we're going to do a business case and then it all stacks up, then obviously I think there might be an expectation from not only the community but also from others, e.g. we've got the government watching us too, that we actually we put our money where our mouth is and actually fund it. Look, the other thing is, but on the other hand, if you do the former of what you said, which was just doing the business case and leave it, then it would then depend on what happens with the future of waters, whether we go it alone, there's some CCO regionally or whatever, that sort of thing. That could be, if I put it colloquially, it could be kicking the decision elsewhere later on. And at the end of the day, I think elected members need to weigh all that up in your considerations.
If I may just add to that, I think the strong advice you're hearing from staff is that the matter of water for a growing city is increasingly top of mind for our staff, that you've heard that as a growth city, our allocatable water is going to be exceeded by our growth projections sooner than our water allocation is up for renewal. We need a step change intervention. The business case, without jumping to conclusion, I think the conclusion is that a demand intervention such as water meters is required. It's just a matter of when, and I think that time is coming sooner. So I think the strong advice from staff is water meters is part of the future, and a financial provision is going to be required to both go through a detailed business case and fund implementation. And if council chooses to not include that, which is entirely your decision, the implication is that the city's growth trajectory will be impacted by lack of water, and we will have to come back and revisit this issue sooner than later.
Thank you.
Councillors, with your leave, because there is a motion, and Angela would like some time to just have a look at that. The other motion is the one that's in the report. What I propose to do, and just bear with me if you are agreeable to this idea, is we've got an item in public excluded that we should digest before we go back to the long-term plan. I'm proposing to take that, have a lunch break, draft things, enable you to explore and then come back to this. Because I don't want to chuck people in and out all day from public but it's a nice break if it comes around what we would have as a natural break. So would you be okay with that? Okay, so we'll do that. So we are going to move into, I move that we move into public excluded. All those in favour? Opposed, carried, we are. And so to members of the public, I'm sorry, but it'll give you a nice decent break for lunch, and we'll be going into public excluded, then we'll be taking our lunch break. So I think if you were to come back at 1,